So, welcome. This is Charlie Wall. My podcast is called Courage, Dear Heart, and I'm joined today by John El Mokadem. Welcome, John.
Hello, nice to be here.
It's lovely to have you here. I've been really looking forward to this conversation because we tried to have this conversation last week in the midst of the COVID-19 lockdown, and I was having power cuts. So, this is our take two.
Life is a bit random. Hopefully it's only going to be take two and not 3, 4 or 5.
Yes, fingers crossed, fingers crossed.
That's right.
So you've had a bit more time to prepare for my first ever question that I normally ask my guests, and that is, courage. What does the word courage mean for you?
Yeah, I wondered if you were going to ask me this again. I've got to admit, I've not sat and thought a lot about it since we tried to do this the first time around. Yeah. So what does courage? So what does courage mean to me? Is that the question?
That's the question. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I guess probably a little of what I said when we did take one still makes sense to me, and I'll probably end up elaborating on this a bit when we talk more as we go along. But I suppose for me, there's something about getting a sense that there is a deeper intelligence to life than my thinking mind, and actually being able to not be in my head so much and allow that thing to do what it knows best. And what I mean by that is I've always seen myself as somebody that was very much, I thought I was in control of things. I thought I was running things in my head. I thought I was very good at wargaming and planning things out, strategizing and figuring out how life was going to work. That always was my mode of operation. And when I sort of started to get better from my sickness, I was seeing that part of what had kept me sick was me living in that thinking mind as a means of navigating life, and to open to the possibility that not only was that partly the reason why I was sick, but that I didn't need to do that to navigate my life, actually felt quite scary and quite courageous in a way to drop into and play with. Now, I'm not sure I see it so much as courageous now, because I think what I see now is that intelligence has actually always been running life and always been navigating things, and it's never really been up to me in my head. But at the time I got sight of it, it looked like a courageous thing to do. It looked like, oh, okay, so if I put down my thinking mind and I just don't really think too much about things, will I really operate? Will I get up? Will I show up to a call with Charlie? Will I, be able to function as a human being? Like, that was not something I had a lot of frames of reference for in my head. And so it just looked like a courageous thing to do. Now I just go, well, yeah, of course, that thing's always been there. And it was an illusion that I was running things in the first place. So I wouldn't regard it as courageous now, but hey, we're all wiser with hindsight, I guess. So
Yes.
now I've no idea actually if that's really what I talked about in take one. I think it's vaguely similar.
It was very similar to that, because there's two things that you mentioned there that I want to sort of dig a bit deeper into. The first thing is you mentioned being sick, and for the people that don't know who you are, I'd love you to just talk about how you were sick and what was going on for you before you came across this understanding.
Oh gosh, okay. I have to try not to make the story too long because it can go on. So, but yeah, I got sick in 2007 with what looked like a virus, kind of topical at the minute. And it was something that really, really knocked me for six. And, I went from being somebody that regarded himself as pretty healthy and pretty together and, pretty much, as I said, in control of things, to someone who really was quite unwell, was unable to exercise in the way that he used to. I found myself increasingly unable to work and was just getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And, I went through sort of the traditional medical system, and particularly after I collapsed one night and, I actually fell through a shower door in our bathroom and had a sort of fainting episode, and ended up having batteries of tests done and scans and blood tests and all sorts of stuff. And they never really found anything specific wrong with me, but I was really not well. Um, and the more I ended up in this kind of, hey, we're not quite sure what's wrong with you, but the uncertainty around that, the more anxious I became, and the more I started trying to dig myself out of the hole that I found myself in. And this kind of went on in various forms for 7 years. So between '07 and 2014, I was sick with this chronic fatigue syndrome. At its worst, I was in hospital for 3 months and
Wow.
bedbound and unable to really function. Even walk around my room was a big deal. And then, over that sort of period of 7 years, I had a sense of improvement, but I was nowhere near sort of the functional person that I saw myself to be before all of that. And, I tried all sorts to get better, whether it was, medication, traditional medical treatments, or alternative things, nutritional therapy, vitamins, meditation, yoga, having metal fillings out of my mouth, and all kinds of stuff. I tried hard. I did what I'd always done in my life, which was I took it upon myself to fix myself because I thought I was really good at fixing life.
Mm.
And this went on for 7 years.
How
And
old
then,
were you when that started, John?
oh, now you're going to ask me to work that out. So 2007, what would I have been in 2007? I would have been 30, nearly 31.
Okay, the reason I ask is just because I have a lot of clients who have chronic fatigue syndrome
Okay.
and
Well,
fibromyalgia, so I was sort of interested in, I think they'd be interested in that sort of mini detail. So thank you.
yeah. Well, so yeah, no one's ever asked me that actually. So yeah, so it was I was around about 30, nearly 31 actually by the time it was really starting to take hold, because it was August sort of '07, so just as I was turning 31. And yeah, and I it started to change in 2014, because I'd been learning about this understanding that you share and I share with people. And I'd been seeing my coach, to try and see if I could get any insight into some of these troubling symptoms that I had. So I had a lot of heat intolerance. I had a lot of fatigue. I couldn't be in sunlight, and I'd learned to shadow walk. So whenever it was sunny, I'd walk in the shadows because I'd get feeling really unwell. If I was in direct sunlight, I'd get, terrible headaches. I feel very faint, very nauseous, and it was a very unpleasant experience. So I'd learned to sort of walk in the shadows. And then I had a holiday that was coming up, family holiday, and we were going to Turkey, which is a hot country. And I was rather worried about this. And you might think, well, why would you go to Turkey if you had heat intolerance? And I'm like, yeah, but I had a family, and they want to do stuff. And so I was trying to do my best to live a normal life as best I could. But I was very worried about it at the same time. And I thought I'm probably going to end up staying in an air conditioned building most of the time. So I'd gone to try and understand and see if there was something I could do about all of this. And I had a conversation with my coach, and I said, well, look, I've got this funny symptom of heat intolerance and fatigue and stuff. Ever come across this? Any insight into what might be going on? And his first comment to me was, maybe you're a vampire, which was mildly amusing at the time. I think I find it more amusing now than I did back then, if I'm honest.
Fairly random.
Fairly random, but hey, it took a bit of the edge off the conversation. And then he said something else to me, having heard me talk about what was going on a lot. And he said, well, maybe this is the power of thought to create your experience. I didn't like that, because it really sounded to me almost like I was being told that I was making up the symptoms. And I'd had a lot of people sort of say things like that to me over the 7 years, oh, it's all in your head, and you know, you're making it up. And so my initial reaction to that comment was not particularly good. I think I actually swore at him at the time, and pretty much told him where to go. But hey, it had sowed a seed in me.
Okay.
And I had enough respect for the person I was working with to go, maybe there's something new here. And I had then a sort of period where I went to go see a functional medicine doctor, and he ran a battery of tests on me. And there were two things that were interesting about these tests. So the first thing was, nutritionally, I was fine, right? And he ran this really sophisticated bundle of tests, and I was just green with everything. There was nothing really I was short of, which wasn't an amazing surprise to me, because I'd become so vigilant about my diet and supplementation and everything else. I was like, okay, I got this nutrition thing handled, right? So that wasn't a surprise to me. But the thing that was interesting was he did this adrenal stress test on me.
Mm-hmm.
And the stress test showed that my cortisol levels were through the roof, as he described it. And all my other hormones were sort of teetering on low on the floor, kind of thing. And I asked, well, what is that all about? And he said, well, cortisol is your body's stress hormone, and it's what rises in response to you being in stress. And I said, well, why are the other hormones on the floor? And he said, well, if your cortisol levels are high for a period of time, building blocks for your hormones are all very similar. And so cortisol gets prioritized. And so the others can start to drop low, and cortisol can sort of stay high. And I was like, that's interesting. What am I stressed about? And then the conversation with my coach came back. And I remember him saying, maybe this is the power of thought to create your experience. And I realized I lived in vigilant thinking about not only my health, but my life 24/7. So if you looked at my life, you probably would have thought, oh yeah, John doesn't have too many problems. Well, apart perhaps from his weird shadow walking thing and all of that sort of thing. But on the face of it, I didn't have a lot of worries or concerns. I was okay. But you wouldn't have known that if you lived in my head, because my head was busy all the time thinking about my illness. Am I going to be okay? What's going to happen if I do this? Have I had enough rest today? Have I slept okay? Have I eaten properly? What's going to happen if I haven't eaten properly? Or if I've got to do this unexpected thing? Or if I'm at this park and then suddenly the sun comes out and I need to get out of the sun because I feel like that was me. That was how I was all the time. And actually, I'd always been like that. It's just that it had taken on a new form with my health. And I think this is one of the things that often dupes people with chronic fatigue, is that they think they've identified the cause. So they go, oh yeah, well, it was the virus I had then, or it was the inoculation I had then, or it was the stressful event that happened then. Probably not. Most of the time, those things might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. But what I saw was that it was a general pattern I had gotten used to of living in vigilance. I lived in vigilant thought because I thought it was helpful. I thought if I didn't do that, that there was nothing else that was running life. This looked like the engine that powered life. So it didn't look safe to me to not be in that. And so, of course, when I got sick, well, I just transferred that same misunderstanding, as I call it now, to my health. And in fact, it got promoted by a lot of the medical people that I work with. They would tell me, well, you need to monitor your symptoms, and you need to pace yourself, and you need to be careful. And all of this was encouraging in me something that was already going crazy. So it was like going to the doctor and them going, oh yeah, just do more of that. Now, I don't say that that's a deliberate thing. I'm not assuming for 1 minute they're trying to make people sick. I think they're trying to do the best they can given the way they understand it. But I didn't realize that when you live in that vigilance, it kicks off a fight or flight response in your body. And that fight or flight response is not meant to run all the time. And it's what kicks in if you're suddenly faced with a tiger in the jungle, and your body goes, oh, I got to get you out of here. So it shuts down like repairing and normal hormone expression, normal neurotransmitter expression, digestion, detoxification, you know, clearing out oxidative stress. Like all of this stuff just gets shut off in favor of get away from the tiger.
Mm.
When you live in that vigilance, you're never in rest and digest. So your body gets tense, so you get pain, fibromyalgia. You get buildups of toxins in your body, because if you clench your fist and do that for any period of time, it starts to hurt. And you get lactic acid buildup and all sorts of stuff like that. Well, not only does that build up systematically because you're tense to run away from a tiger, but then the detoxification pathways that normally clear all that stuff up aren't really working that well because you're sitting in fight or flight worrying about how you are all the time. So it builds up over time. And then what do? We start worrying, oh, look, I'm getting worse. What's happening to me? I'll manage myself even more. Well, great. Now you've dug an even deeper hole, totally innocently, right? Because you just don't get what's going on. So that was kind of my story. When I started to see what was going on, but then I had this, what I would say, burgeoning, is that a proper word? It was sort of a growing insight into me, that there was something deeper behind life than my thinking mind. Well, I was starting to see, maybe the problem is not that I'm actually sick. Maybe the problem is that I just don't see that I'm really not running this game, and that there's something else doing it. And so I got curious, what if I just stopped caring about these symptoms and I stopped trying to manage it all? Well, it didn't get rid of the symptoms immediately, but the fact that I dropped out of the vigilance and I stopped being afraid of how I felt, because I understood it, and because I understood that there was something else running it all, meant that things started to improve really quickly. Within 6 weeks, I was on that holiday in Turkey and I was standing outside in the sun in 40 degrees C heat. If you want a really scary photo, you can actually Google it and you'll find a picture of me standing out in the sun with my t-shirt off. It's not the best looking picture, but it's still out there, as my kids like to tell me when they go on Google at school and laugh at me with their friends. They see this picture. But yeah, it was 6 weeks, and something that had been with me for 7 years had pretty much fallen away. Now,
that was the second part of my question. So I just wanted you to go into that bit a bit more, like how, for anyone listening, anyone who's really struggling with chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, who's hearing you say, you know, I suddenly saw that I'd been vigilant about that and I didn't have to be. There was something else controlling it. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely, yeah. So we are living in a really intelligent body. And so if you look, if you want to have some fun, go and Google, I don't know if this is the best
From your
idea,
t-shirt picture.
What's the t-shirt picture?
So they've got to Google your t-shirt picture and...
Oh, God. Right, yeah. So if you look up the biochemical pathways in the body, you will see a really, like, very complicated, spidery picture of all the processes that are going on in your body at any one time, and the chemical reactions and all of this stuff that is happening. Right now, if you go look at that, and then consider, is that really your job to manage? Like, is that very complicated picture really within the realm of your capability to manage in your head? Or could it be that actually that's not your job? Right? When I had the insight into what was going on with me, I started to see that me trying to manage my body was as ridiculous as trying to manage my digestion, trying to manage my white blood cell production, my red blood cell production, my hormones, my neurotransmitters. Like, that's got to be not my job. And the simple reason for it is if it was my job, I shouldn't be alive right now, and nor should any of us, because you can't sit there in your head and manage all of that stuff. And what happens when you go to sleep? You're not thinking about it, but you're still alive. So it's got to be that there's something else managing all of that. Now, most of us don't have a respect or even an understanding of that. We've almost deleted it from our heads. Oh, it's all up to me. And we're living in a world that sort of enforces that idea that it's up to me. And what that looks like is it's up to me to think about life and figure it out. And then when I figured it out, I'll be fine. Well, what if that's not true? What if there's something managing all of those processes? What if it is before you're thinking, right? What if you have a knowingness that comes to you despite your thinking? What if your thinking is disconnected from what you know to do, right? Think about a simple thing like going to the bathroom. How many of us think about going to the bathroom or try and plan that or figure that out? But most of us aren't sitting there wearing nappies. We don't need to, because at some point something moves our bones and gets us to the bathroom, right? So when we don't recognize that intelligence is there, we spend a lot of time in worrying, thinking, trying to figure out stuff that it's never really been our business to figure out. But the act of trying to figure it out tells our nervous system that we are not where we need to be and that there's somewhere else to get to. And that's interpreted as oh, okay, we need to fight or flee, fight or flight. It's not rest and digest, right? Even when people are in resting in chronic fatigue, in my observation, both in myself and the clients I work with, they're not really resting. They're lying on a bed or in a chair or whatever it might be, ruminating. Have I had enough rest? What's going to happen in an hour's time? Will I have enough energy to do X, Y, and Z? What happens if I have a flare-up or a relapse of symptoms? They're not resting. They're busy in vigilant rumination. And so they're still not getting the benefits of rest because of that misunderstanding, right? So yes, part of that vigilance is caused by not seeing that deeper intelligence, but it's also caused by the fact that we're under another misunderstanding, most of us, which is that we think that being at peace and having well-being is a place that you get to or a circumstance. So we have it'll be okay when fill in the blanks operating, and everybody has got versions of that. It might be, I'll be okay when I don't have symptoms. I'll be okay when my bank accounts are X amount. I'll be okay if my kids behave the way I want them to. Whatever it might be. Like we're all operating with versions of that, but it's an illusion, because if you look at that, you never get to peace and quiet chasing after the criteria, because the mind makes up a new criteria very quickly. Right? So where is that peace? Well, it's actually, from what I see, before you've made up a standard, before you've made up a place to get to and begun the act of wargaming and thinking about how to get there, before you've made it up, you're at peace. You are quiet. You have well-being in every moment, right? Now, we don't live in it all the time. We're not meant to. We're meant to have a human experience. So we will get neurotic and we will make up criteria and we will try and struggle and strive to get places. That's part of the human condition. But it's one thing to do that, knowing that underneath the striving and struggling is what we're looking for. And it's another thing to do it having no sense of that. Because when you have no sense of it, there's so much riding on the struggle and the striving. If I don't get better, I'll never be okay. So I've got to get better at all costs. Versus, yeah, I'm doing my best to get better, but actually there's a place inside of me that's always fine. And at some point I'll drop into it again. There's a different feeling about the two, right? So beginning to get sight of that piece and where it is another thing that starts to undermine us from needing to think so much about trying to get somewhere, knowing that we'll do it from time to time. But if we know where that place is more, and that's why part of my job is to try and facilitate that in people, get them to see it. Where is that thing they're looking for? And what's the nature of it? You know, when people get quiet on calls, I point that out to them. You're quiet now. Why? What's changed? Did we fix your life? Did we do anything different? Or did you just drop out of thinking about it for a minute? Most of us don't recognize it. I had it whilst I was sick. You know, 3 months after coming out of the hospital, I had this moment where I was sitting with my friend and I got really quiet and I didn't understand it because my life was a wreck. You know, everything was in tatters. And I had this 5-6 seconds of being quiet in myself. And I quickly disregarded it and started thinking about how to sort things out. Well, it took years for me to notice that that was actually the goal. You know, that's what I was looking for. I was looking for that quiet. And I kept thinking I had to fix something to get there. No, I didn't. It was there all along.
So when you went to Turkey and you weren't walking in the shadows, which I love, that should be a book title, I think. Had you discovered more peace of mind at that point? Like what you just described was, I had a few seconds of that, but I wasn't entirely aware that that's what was happening.
Yeah, well, that was in my early, so that piece I'd had was, I dropped into it in 2007, but then spent 7 years remembering what that was about and understanding what had happened that day. So yeah, in when I went to Turkey, that was in 2014, I was definitely having a lot more moments of just being at peace. And you know, I'd stopped thinking that peace was something that I got to, you know, that I had to create in a circumstance. I'd begun to see that actually it was always there. It's just that sometimes I wasn't experiencing it and sometimes I was. And when I wasn't experiencing it, I was recognizing, oh, well, I'm in my head right now. And that's okay. It wasn't a, oh, I'm in my head, I've got to get back to peace, because that's another fight. And that happens a lot with people, right? They often get touched by the principles and then have this kind of nice experience. And then the mind is a really slippery character that goes and makes up a new goal and goes, oh, look, there's that nice enlightened peace feeling. That's where I should be 24/7. Nah, not most of us. I mean, if you go meditate on a mountain for the rest of your life, maybe. But most of us are living in, you know, well, we're in much more crazy times than normal. We're living in the thick of the form. The form is chaotic. Life is chaotic. We will get caught in thought sometimes. We will get lost in the craziness and we'll have an experience around that. It's normal. It's not a problem. It's meant to be that way. But again, to know that you don't need to manage the experience, to know that it's made of thought, not circumstance, that it's built to sort itself out. Well, that's really helpful, particularly at the minute, because most of us are sitting in lives that 3 weeks ago it was an unimaginable situation. You know, we would not have thought, oh, well, I'm locked in the house, can't go out, can't do my normal things, I can't go to the shops, you know, there's some random virus knocking around that apparently is not good for us. Like, who would have thought? So
No.
our minds are upset. Our mind makes up a fixed form and goes, well, life is like this. Well, now it's apparently not. So there's a disconnect between how the mind sees the way life should be and how it actually is. And when that disconnect occurs, we experience discomfort. Now, without the understanding, we'd think that that discomfort was data or information about how we needed to fix our lives. And we'd start scrabbling around trying to do that. But at the moment, it's next to impossible, because if you go out and try and fix things to be the way they were before, you're probably going to get fined or arrested or whatever. Who knows at the minute? I don't know how it works. So the good thing is to know, well, of course, that discomfort is normal. The mind is upset. But the nature of the mind in our experience is that it's transient and it's changeable and it's malleable. And eventually it starts to settle into a new normal and the discomfort goes. Not because we're trying to get rid of it, but that's because of its nature. That's what it does. Right. So I've noticed this week, I'm a lot more settled about the lockdown than I was in the first two. And it isn't because I've done anything about it. I've had lots of moments of discomfort and annoyance and anxiety and fear and all sorts of stuff. I just don't care about that experience because I know that it's built to settle and that it's made of thought. And so at some point, my mind's going to go, oh, this is okay. And it'll adapt. So, you know, I don't know how we got onto that. I can't even remember what the question was you asked me. Sorry.
Don't worry. No, the question was, you know, you described a peace of mind, and I was wondering, you know, how when you sort of had your first experience of insight around your stress and how you were creating your, I guess, how you were creating your symptoms, even though when someone hinted at that, although they didn't, it was that, you know, maybe the power of thought to create your experience or something. That's what you were said. So I was kind of interested in whether you'd experienced more peace quite quickly. But the question that occurs to me now, and I think maybe one that my audience may be asking, is that you said, you know, we're not in control. There's a deeper intelligence behind life. And how would you describe that to people, and what's your experience of that?
Well, my experience of it is really an extension of what I started to see with my health journey. So I got curious about the potential that I wasn't in control of what was going on in my body. I wasn't in control of making the symptoms go away. And that's what I started to see was that, yeah, there's something else that deals with that. And then I also saw that that same intelligence was responsible for helping me navigate life. So, you know, a lot of people, for example, I had a client who was quite worried about whether or not you know, she was always in her head about her symptoms, trying to get rid of them. I remember asking her, I said, what are you afraid is going to happen if you aren't thinking about them? And she said, well, I'm afraid I'm going to miss a symptom that is important and that I need to go and see the doctor about. And then this amazing thing happened when I was on the call with her, and she said, oh, wait a minute, I've left my dinner on the stove. So she goes off and sorts her dinner out, and then comes back. And I said, did you burn your dinner? And she said, no, it's fine, actually. I said, oh, good. And I said, tell me, were you thinking about that pan at the point that you just told me that you needed to go and sort it out? And she said, no. And I said, well, what do you make of that? And she said, well, I guess I was nudged. And I said, well, what makes you think that that same intelligence that just got you to go and deal with your dinner when you weren't thinking about it wouldn't have your back if there was a symptom that you needed to go check? And she got really quiet. Now, that's what I see, is that there is some intelligence that is helping me be creative, know what to do, healing my body, helping me know how to navigate uncertainty all the time. And the more I continually look towards and wake up to the truth of that, the quieter life gets. Because whenever I'm not quiet, I'm usually seeking well-being in my head, or I'm seeking to know what to do about something in my head. So I'm very busy. But the more I wake up to the fact that, no, those things like well-being, no, that's not a function of me thinking about things, and knowing what to do, no, that's carried on by the deeper intelligence of life. So I don't need to think about these things. The quieter and more settled I am, and the byproduct of that is a nervous system that lives more in rest and digest. Right? So for your listeners to reflect upon, what do they make of those times when they just know to do things that they've not thought about? What's making that happen? if you're not thinking about those things. All those times when you lose your keys, or, you know, and you try and remember where they are, and then you can't remember. And then at some point, something just pops in your head and goes, oh, they're in the kitchen cupboard, or they're under the bit of paper in the kitchen slab, right? And that is not coming to you because of thought. It's coming to you despite thought. That's that deeper intelligence that I'm talking about. The more we recognize that, the more, I mean, I call myself a recovering intellectual, because I used to really value this. I thought it did a pretty good job of navigating my life until I realized I was sick. And, you know, I thought that was my gift. Well, it's like, yeah, okay, nice idea. But actually, what goes on up here is pretty much irrelevant. Just gives me an experience of being alive, but it isn't the thing that helps me navigate my life or helps me do very much of anything, to be honest with you. And that's what I mean. That's the nature of that deeper thing, is before thought. It is quiet. It is formless. It comes from a deeper place inside of us.
Yes, but it's fascinating, and it's a subject I absolutely love talking about. When I had my first real sort of deep insight into my anxiety and control freakery, yeah, it was extraordinary to just have one single new thought about, oh, you have been creating your experience yourself. You've been creating your anxiety yourself because you were trying to keep yourself safe.
Right.
And it was just one moment, one new thought, and it all went. And you know, it was, as I was saying to one of my clients earlier, like on the podcast, they won't see this, but there's labels in, like, I'm showing this label proudly, right? So
Right.
if you're listening, I'm showing a t-shirt label. Basically, I had to cut off every single label off every single clothing that I ever owned, you know, everything. It just, I could not have a label on me.
Oh, okay.
It's one of
Isn't
my,
it funny what we make up?
I know, it's mental. But yeah, like one moment and that had all gone. And now where did that thought come from? You know, and that, it is fascinating to me. And yeah, I just absolutely love this conversation. So one
Just
last, sorry,
the
go on.
safety thing, I just would tag on to that. Like, I see that all the time. We're innocently looking for safety in something,
Yeah.
and safety is actually in nothing. It's before the something we've made up in our head. There is the ability, the potential for us to dwell in the safety of who we are in any moment, because it's something that exists in our beingness before thought. Right? So, you know, there are people who are in extreme circumstances who connect to this. You know, it's available to all of us. And the more we see that we don't need to live in thought to navigate our life, the more we drop into the safety of who we are. You'll never find safety in the form. Look at the form right now. It's turned upside down, left, right, and center. There is nothing that looked stable 3 weeks ago, very little that looked stable 3 weeks ago, that has not been impacted right now. And if we cling to safety in the form, you'll always feel unsafe, because the form, the nature of it, is changeable. Safety is in something that never changes.
Yeah.
And that thing is underneath our thinking. When you start to see that, even if you have moments of not feeling safe, good to know where safety really is.
Yes. And it is, everything's changeable, and that's so being evidenced right now at the timing of this podcast.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, yeah, to see that you know, what appeared to be safe for people is no longer, I guess, safe, and it comes from something deep inside you, and that's something that I saw very deeply for myself, and it sounds like you have too.
Yeah, I mean, it's part. I mean, if I hadn't have had some of the insight I'd had over the last few years, I'd probably be in a right mess right now. I mean, and that's not to say that I don't have my moments. I really do at the minute. You know, we've had to delay this call today because of randomness in the house. You know, but there would have been a time when I'd have been fighting against the chaos, trying to find, you know, my safety in controlling it all. And now I'm like, no, I don't need, it isn't in that. I am safe. What I am is safe. And from that place, I'll navigate the chaos as best I can, knowing that it's meant to be chaotic.
Mm.
It's not meant to be brought into order. It's meant to be chaotic.
And I guess that's a matter of someone's opinion anyway, right? Whether it's chaotic or not.
Well, exactly. Exactly. I mean, you could say it's chaotic based on some standard that we've made up of what order is.
Mm.
But the problem is not what it's doing. The problem is the standard. So I spend a lot of time on the courses that I do with people talking, well, what is your standard? What have you made up health is? Because people often have really faulty standards about what health is. And they often say, well, health is never feeling tired, or never being in pain, or never having a sleepless night, or whatever. And I'm like, really? Like, before you got your diagnosis, did you never feel pain? Did you never feel tired? Did you never have a sleepless night? And of course, when they look at it, they go, oh yeah, I've made up something that isn't true about how human beings are set up. But because that wasn't even visible to them,
Mm.
they're now living vigilantly for this standard they'll never, ever create. I mean, one of the things that was so interesting when we did the research in 2017 was, you know, seeing the statistically significant indicators of what had changed with people. So we had people who were improving their function in dramatic ways, you know, living their lives, getting out of the house, you know, less pain, less anxiety, less depression. But the interesting statistic for me was that their sleep did not improve in a statistically significant way. And yet their level of function changed dramatically in a statistically significant way. Which, to me, when you think about the name chronic fatigue syndrome, you think, well, oh, I have to manage my sleep in order to not be fatigued. Well, apparently not. Apparently, when you drop out of trying to manage fatigue and worrying about a standard about how much sleep you're getting, you don't feel so tired. You have more energy. Good to know how those standards can just cause us endless trouble.
Is that research? You mentioned the word research. Is that the research you did with Karen DeMarco?
Yeah.
Is there a link that I can put?
There isn't yet, although we are in the final stages, fingers crossed, of peer review with a journal. So
Okay.
we've just submitted some final changes. So we're hoping the journal's going to go, yes, we're accepting and we're publishing. So watch this space. I don't think I'm allowed to share it until we know what's going on with that.
Okay.
So,
Well, don't worry. Like we've said it, it's out there, and if it comes into form, I'll let everyone know.
yeah, I mean, I mean, I hope it does get accepted by a journal, but if it doesn't, then we'll make it available some other way. So it's been 3 years of quite hard graft, that one. So we're hoping we're at the final stretch with it now. So yeah.
Well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
I'll look forward to reading it if it comes out.
Thank you.
So I'm aware of time. So I'd like to ask you where people can find you if they're interested to know more about you.
Yeah, thank you. So we're in the process of building some new websites, or a new website at the minute. So the current one that is live but is a few years old is breakthroughthat.com. And the new website that is partially active is johnelmokadem.com.
Okay.
So yeah, we're adding gradually to the new one, but it's been a bit disturbed by all the crazy situation we found ourselves in. So it's not quite ready yet, but there are some stuff on the new one, but there's probably a lot more on the old one at the minute. So
Yeah, because you do one-to-one group coaching, right?
I do, yes, yeah, I do one-to-one work with a lot of health clients these days, and then we run a group program which is Foundations of Health, which is like the extension of the study we did in 2017.
Okay.
So yeah, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your
Yeah,
time.
cool.
I've
Thank you.
really
Pleasure.
enjoyed talking to you, and I could have probably asked you those questions all day long, but
Sorry, I can go on a bit with this topic, so I hope I haven't, done that too much.
no, it's great. It's great. It's nice. I think the reason I like doing these interviews, whether I do them on my podcast or whether I do them in my circle group, is because I talk a lot too. So it's nice to have someone else to share the same, understanding and the same knowledge with a different voice. But it's not just my voice who's,
I'm
right.
totally with you. I like the bounce off more. There's something a bit richer about it. So yeah, no, thank you for inviting me and having me on here.
Yeah, and I appreciate it, and I'm sure it'll be really valuable for my clients. So,
Oh,
yes, I'll speak to you very soon. Take
thank you,
care.
Charlie. Take care.